So let's get started. Thank you all for joining us. We have a few people online. I hope you can hear us. Give us a thumbs up in the chat window or let us know. We are recording this program today, just to let you know. So welcome. And my name is Kathy Dugan, and I'm the director here of the Cleveland Law Library. And with me are my colleagues from Cleveland Public Library. Would you like to stand up and announce yourselves?
Hi, my name is Steve Capuzzo. I'm the manager of the Social Sciences Department at the main library of Cleveland Public Library. We're happy to be here. We've been partnering with the Law Library for quite a few years on these book discussions and other events. So I'm very happy to be here today.
And Mike?
And I'm Mike Dean, a public service associate at the Social Science Department in the Cleveland Library. So I encourage you, if you're interested in knowing more about future book discussions, you have a sign-up sheet over here by the cookies, strategically placed. So thank you all for coming.
Great. So we are happy to welcome back Peter Kirsanow for the third time for a discussion of his latest book, Zero Option. And it's a masterpiece in the genre of historical fiction. Zero Option is Peter's fourth published book and the second in the W.E.B. Griffin series on men at war. His first being The Devil's Weapons. If you like books by Tom Clancy, Vince Flynn, Brad Thor, and others, you're going to love Peter's novels. Zero Option, if you haven't already read it, is set during World War II in November of 1943, when President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill are going to meet Soviet Premier Stalin for the Tehran Conference, which was a real event. When the chief of the United States Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, hears that someone plans to assassinate 2 or 3 of the leaders, he sends his top agents to try and foil their plans. Kirkus Reviews said that Peter's book is a fast-paced, compelling yarn that thriller readers will enjoy. Having read the book myself, I was amazed at all of the twists and turns and the counterintelligence strategies of and actions of the leaders and agents of all 3 countries. Peter's books have been flying off the shelves. And he recently told me that at a recent book signing at a local bookstore, they ran out of books before everyone could buy a copy. By way of introduction, Peter Kirsanow is a partner in the Labor and Employment Practice Group at the law firm of Benish Friedlander. Early in his career, he was employed as labor counsel for the city of Cleveland. In between now and then, Mr. Kirsanow served for 2 years as a presidential appointee to the National Labor Relations Board, and he is currently serving his 4th 6-year consecutive term on the United States Civil Rights Commission. Significantly, Peter Kirsanow has also testified before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee on 5 presidential candidate nominations for U.S. Supreme Court. He is often still asked to testify before Congress on labor and employment matters. Gosh, he sounds very busy, and he is, but he still finds time to write articles and books. And just to note, we have a small connection to Peter. When he was in law school at Cleveland Marshall, now Cleveland State, he used to work here one summer. We are very proud to welcome him back to our library for this event. And Peter has indicated that he would like to provide some background information about his book writing process and getting it published to start us all off.
Thanks very much, Debbie. Yeah, thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Debbie, I think I know a lot of people are always fascinated by how is it that we get published. Every lawyer wants to be an author. I've never met a lawyer who didn't want to be a published author, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Everyone seems to strive toward that. And I was very fortunate. I just to let you know how I started out, I was taking a deposition out in LA. Actually, I was supposed to take a deposition out in LA. And the opposing attorney's mother got ill, so the deposition never went forward. And I was sitting in LA airport for hours. I just started scribbling something. I got on a plane, scribbled some more. It was about a 4-hour flight. And by the time the flight landed, I'd had a chapter. And I thought, this was just something to pass the time. I didn't think I was going to continue it. And I'd let it go for several months. I don't remember how long. And then I looked at it again one Saturday and started writing some more and writing some more and writing some more. And then I had a manuscript. And this will go to all you aspiring authors who think about how it is that you get published and what are the odds of getting published. Well, in any event, I began writing some more and then finished it. And I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. I didn't belong to any of these clubs that a lot of aspiring writers belong to. It tells you how you get published or anything. I knew nothing about it. But I had a friend who had written a number of nonfiction bestsellers. He was former Secretary of Education Bill Bennett. And I said, well, how do you get published? And he said, well, I'm going to, send you to my agent and you can talk to him. Well, his agent is the guy who, he was like an agent of the stars. He had done, represented the Obamas in their works, Clinton, everything, okay? And he said, well, it's like very rarely does anybody get published, okay? There's something, I don't even remember what the ratio was, but it was some extraordinary ratio. 1 in 500 is probably, I think it was more like 1 in 5,000. So that's kind of depressing, dispiriting. But he said, just send it out to people. He didn't handle that kind of stuff, nonfiction. So he said, just send it out to some agents. It's very difficult to get an agent. Well, my wife was charged with sending it out to a number of agents, and what everyone had said, got a number of rejection letters, okay? People saying, oh, nice, very nice, but no thanks. Then finally, I got a letter from an aspiring agent, somebody who had just become an agent and was working as a clerk at some major publishing house. And I got excited. She said, well, if you make certain changes to it, maybe we can look at it. So I made certain changes to it. And I was about to send it to her. And then I got this frantic phone call from the guy who's currently my agent, who's one of the major agents in the business. And he also does tons of movie work. And he was frantic. He says, the book's still available. The book's still available. And I'm like, I'm trying to be cool about this. He was in Ireland at the time playing golf or something. And I said, well, I'm kind of shopping it around right now. I've got some bites. And he said, look, I'd like to represent you. And, it took me about a half second to say yes. And the next thing you know, the journey was really interesting because he then sent the manuscript out to a bunch of different publishing companies or the various personnel publishing companies. And he got a lot of interest in it. And then he said he's going to put it up for bid. So I still remember that day vividly. It's the most interesting day of my publishing career. I was taking a deposition at the time. And my agent said, well, 10 o'clock, we're going to put up for auction. I still to this day don't know what it means. I think they just put it online and then various publishing houses bid upon it. And that started happening. I was in the middle of a deposition, which I recessed probably 45 times just so I could go and call my agent, see what was going on. And he said, well, it's going on, and it went up. It was a lot of money. And I was just stunned by it. And it was a great day, aside from that, just getting published was the thing. So it got published. It did extremely well. I wrote a sequel to it. And I have other sequels going on right now. I'm in the midst of doing 2 other books. And then one day, my agent said, well, I got a call from the W.B. Griffin estate. I said, well, that's great. I've read all of his books. He goes, that's good because they'd like you to continue the writing. W. Griffin had just died, a year before that. And I said, well, that's really good, And they said, the publisher, who again is like publisher to the stars, I'm his least important person by far, said you don't necessarily have to follow, you don't have to adopt his writing style, which is impossible. Trying to adopt somebody's writing style is very, very difficult. But you have to have fidelity to all the characters, the storylines, and all that. And I said, fine, because it's not difficult at all. And I produced, The Devil's Weapons, and that was fun to write that. First of all, I love history. I've been reading history a lot, and I have a particular affinity for World War II history. And so it was an adventure. I tried to combine kind of a James Bond kind of aspect I was combining James Bond with World War II. And that's the way Dick Kennedy, who is the protagonist in these novels, is kind of like a World War II James Bond. And Eric Fulmer, his friend, who's a childhood friend, is, a similar type of character. And the great thing about this is you have all these historical characters who are some of the most fascinating people in the world. As an aside, not pertinent to anything, but we all have read history. But when you read history with a purpose, that is an intent to adopt or to have fidelity to the character of a particular individual, you learn a lot more and you start to think kind of like them or try to think like them. To me, the most fascinating person in World War II and maybe in the last 2 centuries was Winston Churchill. The more you read about him, the more incredible this guy is. Now, I have a number of fascinating, look, major characters in my novels, the W. Griffin novels that I write are Hitler, Stalin, Churchill, FDR, Wild Bill Donovan, you name it, all of the major characters and, people who are giants in history. Churchill dwarfs all of them when you really get down into it. And, you may have different perspectives on it. But what an extraordinary individual he was. Imagine somebody who's trying to defend an entire island against the Wehrmacht. He's managing and trying to convince the Americans, by the way, to first come into World War II and then how to do it and, devote more resources to it. At the same time, he's battling, political opposition within Britain. And he's writing history books that are like this thick at the same time as there's the Battle of England. He's getting bombed and he's in bunkers. All this stuff is going on. And plus, he prodigiously drinks 3 or 4, bottles of liquor. The guy is extraordinary. The intellect by itself was extraordinary. I didn't see anybody in doing the research. And, we've all read about FDR and Stalin and others. And Stalin is fascinating in a different regard. But nobody that when you start getting into it, there are certain people who transcend, I think, historical arcs, and Churchill clearly is one of them. And I think, and my own conclusion was, you can have your own conclusion. My own conclusion was he was the most important man of the 20th century. And, others can have different perspectives. The other guy, a fascinating historical character was Lavrenti Beria, who, if you don't know, was Stalin's chief henchman, head of what was the predecessor to the KGB. This guy may have been the most vile, evil individual of the 20th century. And that's saying a lot when you consider the 20th century, because look, Stalin was his boss, and he's fighting against Hitler. These were titanic characters. I'm using that word a lot, but they really were larger than life. But Beria was the guy who, he engineered a number of things that were really amazing. Amazingly evil, such as, the extermination of a lot of different populations, including the kulaks, where, millions of people were exterminated. The Cotton Force Massacre, which was the massacre of thousands of Polish officers and intelligentsia. The guy had no soul. And when you get into these guys and you start writing about them, it's bracing to think about the fact that there were individuals like this. You can write historical perspectives, but when you start to try to adopt the persona of these individuals, you start to think about what motivated them, what kind of people were these, how could they actually do things like this? And then you have to keep in mind that, okay, World War II was sui generis, but that doesn't mean that these individuals or individuals like this can't continue to exist and maybe out there somewhere. Anyway, we're getting a little bit far afield in terms of the novel. But so that's how, things started to progress. I got the opportunity to write these novels. It was a lot of fun. You had to have fidelity to, the characters, as I said, you have to have fidelity to history, and you better have not just the nomenclature, but operational details spot on. Because, these books sell all over the world, and I get a lot of emails, especially from Germans. Okay, now the Germans are, quote, the bad guys in this, right? And they've got they always have a lot of axes to grind with. But they are fascinating because they will, I remember vaguely now, I won't get this right, but I had one scene in which a particular type of Panzer was firing its machine gun at the protagonists who were trying to escape into a forest. And I described how it went, and the details aren't important, except that the rate of fire I had, or at least the way you would surmise the rate of fire was occurring, according to this guy, was impossible. Because that type of tank with that kind of machine gun didn't have a rate of, it fired a 7.62 caliber. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I had done the research on this, by the way, but I guess I was a little bit off. And you'll get that kind of stuff from, the British Army. I don't get too many from Americans. I get letters or emails from Brits, Germans, especially. I've gotten some letters or emails from Poles. And they're often from children or relatives of people who have been like in concentration camps or have been fighting in different battles. And you learn a lot of history from that. So that's another benefit to doing this. It's just fascinating. You get to meet online or on paper people that you otherwise wouldn't. And these are extraordinary, many of them are extraordinary people or have extraordinary tales to tell. So the writing process wasn't that difficult. You do the research, you know, as lawyers, we know how to write. What's fun about this is when you're writing as a lawyer, you have, you know, you got to follow the transcript, you got to follow the law, you know, you can't make stuff up. Really frustrating. Now, I'm not sure if every lawyer abides by that. This is based on some of the briefs I've gotten, but nonetheless, somebody probably say that about me. But it's, you know, you have kind of free reign as long as you've got fidelity to the history, as I said. And I'll talk a little bit about, you know, my own books where you don't have fidelity to anything except it's got to be semi-plausible. But with The Devil's Weapons and The Devil's Assassins, I tried to be as accurate as possible, so I wouldn't have historians, you know, breathing down my neck saying this isn't plausible. And also because the estate of W.B. Griffin expects that. You know, they expect it because W.B. Griffin, so I think he had something like 55 or so novels. I don't even remember. He had not just the Men at War series, but he had a Marine series. So W.B. Griffin was called, you know, the poet laureate of the American military. He knew his stuff. He had the jargon. He knew how to make it sound like at least the soldiers of that era, but also the mentality of, so like my brother-in-law served 4 tours in Vietnam, and he is through and through, you know, a soldier. And there's a certain mindset that people like that have that I don't have. I didn't serve. You know, the closest I came was getting recruited by West Point to play football. But these guys, they're honorable, you know, these are honorable people that deserve to be honored by being accurate about their experience and all the technical details of the equipment, the battles, you know, all of that stuff. Otherwise, they're not going to be reading it. And those are the folks that I think are the biggest audience for my books. I'm getting a little bit far field, I apologize for that. But with respect to this particular book, you know, the point of the book was that you have W. Griffin characters, principal characters, Kennedy and Fulmer, who are charged with making sure that a particular professor, Polish professor, isn't captured by the Germans because he has the ability to come up. He's, you know, one of these geniuses who probably would have been part of the Manhattan Project. And there's references to some of the individuals, you know, if you've watched, Oppenheimer, you'd recognize a number of the names. So the Office of Strategic Services, again, predecessor to the CIA, is charged with trying to extract the professor from Poland as the Germans are coming into Poland and getting him out of there. If the Germans get him, or if the Soviets get them, America, the West is going to be in trouble. So there's you know, a lot of intrigue about doing that. There's a good amount of violence because I like violence, and the little kid in me likes, you know, all that kind of stuff. And they're escaping this and escaping from that, and you know, I've got probably a lot of not implausible, but I like to exaggerate a little bit about the physical prowess of different individuals. And if you're a little kid like me, the body count's pretty good. Okay, plenty of action, but you'll get, I think, a pretty good reading of history too. Because again, it's during the fulcrum of much of what transpired during the 1943, 1944 period of time, which was crucial because it really was the inflection point upon which the Allies were beginning to push back against the Germans. And the intrigue of all that, again, when you get into this, it's really a lot of fun because as a student of history, I never had a reason to just consider the motivations of various people, whether it's the Churchills or the FDRs. And when I say motivations, other than the motivations you see in history books. But when you think about their personal situations, you know, FDR had significant issues himself. Churchill, of course, as I described, is the titan of the 20th century. And then Stalin, who is kind of an opaque character. Again, pure evil along with Beria. And you think about what was motivating them, not in terms of can they protect the Eastern Front, or can they, what would they do on D-Day and all that stuff, but their motivations in terms of political considerations at home. It really does inform how you write a novel, because otherwise you're just going to have these paper characters that, just cardboard cutouts of Churchill and stuff. You see it on TV all the time. Okay, that's Churchill, and you see Churchill sitting there at Yalta Conference, for example. And, who is this guy? Who is Franklin Delano Roosevelt? Well, these were fascinating characters, and kind of putting in or kind of filling in the flesh of these characters is an interesting enterprise. I'm fortunate that I write very fast, and for those of you who are aspiring authors, people write in different ways. And again, I've never belonged to any of these clubs, but what I do is, and I've been fortunate in this, I typically write on weekends, and I write very fast. So I don't outline things. I know that you're supposed to I've since then been asked to come to these clubs and give these presentations, and I listen to other authors and what they do. And I understand that probably more authors than not outline their books, at least a sketch of an outline before they write. I don't do that. What I do is on Saturdays, which is when I write again, the best place for me to write is my dining room table, because I've got a panoramic view of my yard. And I just get a cup of coffee, down the coffee, and then I don't even think about what I'm going to write. I just get a legal pad. I don't type very well, so I write it out in longhand, and I begin by writing the. And almost by magic, words begin to appear. I can't describe how it happens. I'm going to try and describe anything magical or mystical to this, but it's just that it kind of begins the train of motion. And pretty soon I'm probably writing maybe 12 to 14 pages, over about a 6-hour period. And unfortunately, I can write very fast. I'm a great bullshitter, excuse me. So that helps when you're writing fiction. And so that's what I did with the first novel, and that's what I've done with subsequent novels. And it's with W.B. Griffin, of course, it's more challenging. When I'm writing my own novels, I've got one that'll be coming out. I don't know what the exact publication date is. I think it's my best novel, at least my agent thinks it is. In fact, he held on to it for a while because he wanted the timing to be correct. It's called The Black Russian. It's more contemporary. It has to do with nuclear facilities, and there's all kinds of stuff going on. And it's, all my books end with the possibility of an apocalypse. Okay, I never wanted to have anything that's just kind of humdrum. If you read, trying to remember, oh gosh, one of the great spy novelists whose name escapes me now. The stakes are big, but it's never apocalyptic. The stakes are, okay, maybe this guy gets caught, or maybe a particular advantage that the West has over the Soviets is lost. In each of my novels, I always wanted to have, if the protagonist doesn't prevail, game over. Everybody in the world is dead, in the most horrific way. And also, all of my antagonists are the worst human beings in the history of the world. They're worse than Hitler. And if you don't kill these guys now, awful things are going to happen. And I also because I'm not, not Hemingway or anybody else like that, don't pretend to be, and I never went to any writing classes. Each of my chapters ends with a cliffhanger. Okay. And what I found as I said, I get a lot of emails from fans that are very gratifying. They love this stuff, Now, I have no doubt that if I went to one of my old English professors at Cornell, they would say, "What did we teach you? This is all you, how can you do this stuff? This is so sophomoric." To my knowledge, none of my English professors ever sold more than 10 novels. Okay? So I don't care. I'm here not to, as I said, I'm not to impress anybody. I'm here to just have fun and make money. And so far, it's been working out pretty well. I'll just stop right there for now. I know I haven't said a whole lot about the book, because Kathleen, I know, has some questions for me, which will probably kind of fill in the blanks.
Well, let's get started since we're in a library setting. I know you read a lot of government publications, but did you have access to any special research collections for this book?
No,
or
not
any
really, other than my brother-in-law, who's my brother-in-law's family is the Stimson family, not the Simpsons. And Henry Stimson was Secretary of War to two presidents, Secretary of State to two presidents, I believe, one of the giants in history. And he gave me a lot of background about this. And kind of inspires me to do stuff like this. He also gave me the inspiration for my own novels because he served a number of tours in Vietnam and he did things that are still classified. Okay, now he doesn't reveal the classified stuff, but he told me certain things in passing. And every time he does that, it's like, you see, I have no hair. That's because my hairstyle, it's like amazing stuff. I mean, that's about the extent of stuff, but I do the research that I can. It's unclassified and, but I don't have access to classified material. I don't have clearances.
Got you. And did you learn anything in your research about FDR, Churchill, or Stalin that you didn't know beforehand?
As I said, the personal challenges that become a lot more vivid because you're thinking about it in that sense. And I think Churchill, again, the greatest character of the 20th century. FDR is a guy who, I mean, if you didn't know that he was a paraplegic, you'd say, no way, the guy's an Olympic athlete. The things he was able to accomplish, and I'm not a big fan of the New Deal, by the way, or any of that other stuff, but the fact is, he was an extraordinary character to be able to do the kind of things he did. You begin to admire these individuals. You don't admire Hitler, obviously, or Stalin, again, titanic figures, but the Churchills of the world, the FDRs and others like Wild Bill Donovan, who's the head of the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, predecessor to the CIA. This guy was, for lack of a better term, a stud. He won the Medal of Honor, among other things, for his exploits in World War I. Then he goes on to, he's the head of the OSS, predecessor to the CIA. This guy was an amazing individual. Amazing times, I think, produce or create, they draw out things from individuals that otherwise wouldn't and become just really extraordinary people. So I didn't, I learned a lot in terms of their personal character, but not in terms of this history. I had a pretty good sense of that.
I ask you every time I see you about movie deals.
Well, we have had some inquiries. My agent, who's done a number of movie deals, says, don't get excited about them. We always get bites on things that are pretty good, okay? But he said, we had a couple for my own novels. It's not on the W.B. Griffin series, but on my own novels. And I'm not going to mention anything about that for fear of, number one, clearing the deal. And number two, even though I've not signed a non-disclosure agreement, I don't want to do anything that might really reveal some confidences. But yeah, we've had some bites on that. I don't know if any of you know who Mark Greene is. Mark Greene writes in My Genre, so of course you do. Kevin knows everybody. Mark Greene wrote the Gray Man series, and which became wildly successful. And then he began we share the same agent. I ghostwrite for W.B. Griffin, Titanic author. Greene ghostwrites for Tom Clancy. Okay. And when at one point, I don't remember the timing of this, but Mark got his own series made into a Netflix deal. A huge Netflix deal.
I think it's Ryan Reynolds, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
It's an incredible series.
It really is. And so the aim is to see if we can replicate that. I'm not going to hold my breath, but it's always fun to just talk about that.
So who would play your characters?
Probably, I think Dwayne Johnson would be the principal guy, and I'd be his debonair older brother. So
you want a cameo?
Not just a cameo. I have to be like a co-star. I've got to have a guy for Dwayne Johnson along the line, because he's always messing up, and the older brother's got it. And plus, I get the girls all the time. So, but yeah, it's nothing has happened. I haven't signed any deals, and it's all kind of. But I just like thinking about it. It's kind of fantasy, wonder about these kinds of things. But I take enormous satisfaction. It's just fun to write. It's such a departure from. I probably have one of the most interesting practices in all of Cleveland. I do a lot of really interesting stuff. I'm all over the country. I'm a labor and employment lawyer. And I have just great fun. I deal with some of those colorful characters when you're dealing with, Teamsters from Chicago, and I can tell you all kinds of stories of things I've encountered in my career. Despite the fact that I have a very interesting and fulfilling practice, it is boring on steroids compared to, the things that the people that I write about, the actual characters that I write about, even the fictional characters are a lot more fun. So they do all kinds of things that I wish I could do when I was a little kid. You would kind of imagine as a little kid, and I see some folks here are probably near my age, not quite. But growing up, I was a big fan of James Bond, of course, Sean Connery, and The Man from Uncle. I don't know if you remember The Man from Uncle. Okay, Man from Uncle was a TV show for about 4 or 5 years. Napoleon Solo, Ilya Kuryakin, these guys were spies in the ilk of, they were like very similar to a James Bond kind of character. And so I had fantasies about these things, and I always kind of wanted to write about that and then take it to another level. And that's kind of the direction in which I go. I have a lot of fun with this. It's similar to a screenwriting. In other words, I didn't want to get dense on these things. I wanted to keep it something that was easy reading, but had factual and historical validity or accuracy. So, and it works. It's as I was telling Kathy just a little while ago. I'm an old man now, going to be retired soon. And this is something that you can continue to do. Writing's the easiest thing in the world. As long as you've got your mental faculties and you've got, for most people, a typewriter, me, a right hand, you can write. And as I said, you can make things up. It's just great stuff.
So a few questions about the book. Does anyone have a question, or I can ask some?
Yes.
Dave?
Okay, what have you read on Roosevelt and Churchill?
Well, I've read, I can't really reference specific tracks that I've read, but I had read a number of works about Churchill, and I'll have to go back and look at my bibliography. There were a number of things that probably about 6 or 7 textbooks on each of them, and a few on Stalin, not just for the book. I mean, this is something I've done over the course of many years, and also for my own enjoyment, my own knowledge. But I'm trying to think of, actually, nothing's coming to mind off the top of my head. If I could, I'd recommend them. Anybody else?
Go ahead.
How long does it take you to write one of these books?
Well, because I'm doing it usually in the evenings and weekends. From the time I begin one until the time I finish one, it's usually about 4 to 5 months. But in terms of actual writing time, I probably produce 4 pages an hour, 3 to 4 pages an hour. Or another way of putting it is about 1,000 words an hour. So, all right. So I'm a pretty fast writer. And again, fast in terms of, I don't know how fast you can write when you write longhand, but I'm not spending a whole lot of time thinking about things. Okay, I just try to write and get it out there. And then if it doesn't make any sense, I'll edit it and take certain things out. But I try to get it out first, just kind of, disgorge everything out of my mind, and then do editing after that.
When you edit, when you edit, does the book condense?
No. I might take some stuff out, but I also may add things. So let's say that I've got 110,000 words on first draft. The editing may take out 15,000, but I may add 20,000 to it. So, there may be I'd say about 20% of the words in the book are affected by my editing. Okay.
Sir?
Stalin died suddenly in 1954. Has there been anything factual that says that maybe he was assassinated?
Not factual. There's all kinds of rumors about how Stalin died, and whether or not there's something that I think is apocryphal, because I don't even think it's historically chronologically accurate. When Stalin died, Maria said, "The tyrant is dead." But then Stalin opened his eyes. Okay, and everyone, because one of the things about you probably have some familiarity with the history. that was a scary period of time. I mean, the people under Stalin, I mean, Lavrentiy Beria was responsible for the deaths of millions, but he's petrified of Stalin. And when you look at Stalin and read about Stalin, Stalin is kind of this character who doesn't say a lot. If you read about him in meetings, he's not saying a whole lot. And when you read histories about him, there's not a lot of, he's not a very loquacious character. And you wonder, how did he become that powerful and that prominent? What did he do? And I still can't figure it out. As much as I've read about Stalin, FDR you can figure out. Whip smart and could outtalk anybody. And understanding that democracy is a little bit different than the Soviet Union. But still, you've got to be able to persuade and coerce people. And that requires, I think, to some extent, having command of the language. And you hardly hear Stalin talking at all. Maybe somebody's out there as a historian will tell me that I've missed something, that he was like talking like crazy. I just don't see it. What you see very often seems to be the case. You would always see these pictures of Stalin on a reviewing stand, right? He'd be sitting there. And it's for all Soviet leaders, it was the same thing. They'd be on the reviewing stand, tanks go past, and he'd be going like this. And there's the picture of him with, can't remember his name. Next to the,
Molotov.
no, not with Molotov, but with, who's the guy who was in the photo and then was not in the photo? Remember him? I should know this. I do know it, and I can't, right now I'm having a difficult time remembering it. But getting back to it, these characters were titanic characters, a lot of fun. Stalin was the most evil of the big three characters, without question. And when you read the histories of this stuff, which, we've done beforehand, it's one thing, because it's an academic exercise. When you read about it for purposes of trying to humanize these people, it becomes chilling, because you start to think about the process by which they order the execution of millions of people, but also certain discrete individuals. There would be people that were in favor at one time, and then 15 minutes later, they're getting their throats cut. And this actually happened. Then you see them ordering people to their certain deaths, and the people who are being ordered to their deaths know they're going to their deaths. So it's when you write these things, opposed to reading them, I think there's a little bit of a difference. When I've read histories before, I would read it and be somewhat dispassionate. When you write about it, you're really kind of engaged in the mindset and psychology of the actors, the historical actors. And you say to yourself, how could they have done certain things? Both the heroes and the villains, how could they have done certain things? But the titanic scale of World War II is just off the charts. So when you're talking about somebody who ordered the deaths of millions, that's a particular kind of monster.
Have you seen the World War II Memorial in Washington? It's very moving.
Yeah. I'm in Washington fairly frequently. And so I've done the tours for all the memorials. Yeah.
Gotcha. Mike, did you have a question?
Yeah, that's why I asked about, you touched on it earlier about your approach to writing.
Mhm.
Comparing when you step into a series, like the Griffin theory, as opposed to your own thing. Sound like you weren't very fazed by that. If you could elaborate on that.
Well, I should have been probably. I should have been fazed by it because, this guy's written 50 plus books. He's written 1 million bestsellers. He's had books made into movies, and I'm going like, okay, I'm going to just kind of replicate this stuff. I probably, it's like asking somebody, hey, Michael Jordan's no longer playing. You want to play this game? It's kind of like, but I didn't appreciate the scale of it until I started getting, one of the things I get, as I said, you get emails from a lot of folks about the historical accuracy of something. And it's usually about something very minute that you would ordinarily miss. But sometimes you get emails from people, good and bad. I mean, by good, I mean praising you, and sometimes people criticizing you. And when you are writing, as I said, the publisher never required me to adopt W. Griffin's writing style, which would have been a little bit difficult. Plus, W. Griffin was, he was called the poet laureate of the U.S. military. There are people who expect you to at least somewhat replicate the writing style and are disappointed when you don't. So I get emails from people, you're not supposed to read reviews either, they tell you, it's almost impossible to do, but you read, Publishers Weekly had a very nice review of me, and I felt pretty good about that. Okay, had a really nice review, and then I get an email from, one of W. Griffin's fans, pretty much telling me that I should just go back to kindergarten. This is horrendous. That's does nothing to do, and it affects me. I'm like, well, because I'm trying to please these folks, okay, and also again because I think there's a responsibility to have some fidelity to, or to honor the author, the deceased author. So anyway, I'm getting off track. I can't even remember where I was going with this, but it's a different thing writing a continuation of an author series, somebody else's works, than it is from writing my own stuff. Writing my own stuff, I've got free reign. I can be a jerk. I can do whatever I want to do. I don't have to be, it's almost like a writing assignment in school when you're writing a novel, continuation of a novel of a famous deceased author.
I follow two authors, Clive Cussler, who's deceased
Yeah.
now, and he has someone writing his books. But I think of James Patterson and all the people he writes with.
Mhm.
I mean, he comes
I
out
think
with
there's like
prolific.
30 of them, seriously.
Yeah, and they're all different.
Yeah.
You'll like one author's take on a James Patterson book, and you won't like maybe another's as much.
Yeah.
Because they don't adopt necessarily the style.
Right. But again, maybe it's just me, but I do think, even though the publishing company has never said you have to, in fact, they specifically said you don't have to emulate them. You've got to maintain fidelity to the characters and storylines and stuff like that. But you don't have to adopt the writing style, which is always difficult to do anyway. I think I could do a reasonable approximation, but it's liberating not to do it, but it's also confining because, again, he's got millions of fans across the world. And we'll hear from the people who don't like your writing style. Unfortunately, I've only heard from, I think, one or two people who prefer a different writing style, something closer to W.B. Griffin. Many others have said they thought that, it was a little bit refreshing to see a different take on something, but having the same characters. But the characters have a history, and I think that keeps you in the lanes. Because he's written 4 or 5 books with these particular characters. They've done certain things. And so that informs the way these characters are going to approach other situations that they may handle in the future.
I have to tell you something. My colleague Deja was reading book number 1, and I started talking to her about book number 2 and the 2 main characters. And she said, "Oh, they're still alive." I said, "Whoops, spoiler."
Well, that's great. The idea is, even though you suspect that the characters, the protagonists at least, are going to remain alive, there's got to be some tension, right? Why would you read these things if you know, hey, they're going to prevail in the end? Okay, so there's got to be at least some doubt that these characters are going to continue to the next novel or a novel beyond that. And one of the ways you do that, at least for me, different authors, better authors than me have different techniques, but for me, I introduce other principal characters into a book that I know I'm going to be killing off at some point. And because my books have lots of mayhem in it, and lots of blood and guts and everything else, I have to have a lot of characters that get killed off. Some of them you want killed. They're the bad guys. They may be, the SS Obersturmbannführer or somebody like that. You want these guys dead, or some of these guys in the NKVD who are really awful, like Major Taras Gromov, who was in both of the books. And Gromov is actually based on an historical character, not an historical character. It's a character that members of my family were familiar with, had to deal with. Guy was bad news, probably responsible for the killing of hundreds of people personally. And again, the scale of World War II is different than anything we could possibly imagine. You had individuals, certain individuals. Now the name is escaping me. There was a Russian, I think I'm even having both, but you have people who were personally responsible, not for just ordering the deaths of 1,000 people.
She might have the name.
Florenzi?
Scorzeni.
No, Scorzeni.
Florenzi.
Did I ever talk about Otto Scorzeni?
No,
Remind me to do that. But there was another guy, an historical character, who was a Russian or Soviet.
Steiger?
No.
No.
I'll think of it may come to, but anyways, there was a Soviet officer who was personally responsible for assassinating 10,000 people, not with a machine gun, not as like the Cotton Forest Massacre or anything like that, where it was done, a mass execution with thousands of machine guns. one at a time. And I describe a little bit in this book. They would bring him into this concrete bunker. It was a sloped floor with a drain at the end, and there was a hose there so they could hose off the guts and blood. Remember that scene? And that's a true story. He would make these people kneel in front of him, shoot them in the back of the head, and bring in the next guy. 10,000, one by one by one. He also was charged with executing some of opponents of Stalin and Beria. And then he finally got executed in the end. But there was, I mean, the scale of the depravity, the evil is truly amazing. When you write about it again, as you know, when you guys write anything, if you write a brief or anything like that, it sticks in you more than if you just read it. Writing about it makes you part of it almost. So the scale in the it was really something. So that you had that one guy whose name is going to come to me at some point, but you don't remember his name.
Yeah, I thought, did that guy turn into an alcoholic?
He did, exactly right. He became an alcoholic. I mean, how could you do that and not become, I mean, the guy had to be just, who knows what he had to be. But there are evil people in the world, and World War II probably produced more of them than any of them. Some of it is truly extraordinary. But Otto Skorzeny, he's on the wrong side, okay? He's a German SS officer. When I said Churchill was the most titanic character and made the most fascinating, I should have had a caveat. Hardly anybody knows about Otto Skorzeny. Otto Skorzeny was a German commando. True story. He was an actual individual. He was James Bond on steroids, the most extraordinary individual in terms of a fighting man I've ever read. I've read a lot of, not just World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, you name it, every war I can think of. Skorzeny there are some descriptions in the book of what he did. He liberated Mussolini from a prison on top of a mountain. This mountain was the most heavily guarded thing imaginable. It's on top of a mountain, and they had troops all around it, okay? There's no way anybody could have penetrated all of the troops that were surrounding the mountain, that were on top of the mountain. He's in a bunker, concrete bunker in there. No way in the world is Mussolini getting out, okay? British troops, American troops, everything. Skorzeny gets a glider and takes some stormtroopers with him, okay? Elite Russian or German commandos. And they glide in quietly, without anybody knowing about it, come onto the top of this plateau of the mountain, get out with submachine guns, disarm all the people who saw them, take Mussolini, and then spirit him away. It was when you read, there's more description of it in the book, and when you read the history of it, you go like, it's impossible. There's no way you could do that. James Bond couldn't do it. It's an impossibility. But it was like a day at the office for Skorzeny. He did these kinds of things on a regular basis. Again, you don't want to create hagiography about somebody who's a German soldier. The Germans were bad guys, titanic bad guys in this whole story. But to give you a frame of reference, after World War II was over with, who did he go work for? Mossad.
Oh,
They're not dummies. Mossad said, we want the best. And they got Skorzeny. And he did, and what did Skorzeny? Among the other things that we know he did, because much of what he did is never going to be revealed, is he was charged with going after Nazi war criminals. Okay, so that's what he did, in his life after World War II. So if you want to read, again, Churchill's, I think, the most amazing individual of the 20th century, but in terms of just amazing individual, Skorzeny is a combination James Bond, George Patton, you name it, just an amazing guy. One day a movie needs to be made about this guy because he was the real deal. Again, I don't know, reading the histories, that Skorzeny did anything that would be, there were a lot of German troops that did things that were objectionable. Some of them did it because they're the direction of Hitler and they had no choice, but we're not going to be giving them any excuses. They did really horrific things. I don't think Skorzeny did any other things, not to, excuse him or anything, but he seemed to be an honorable soldier who, he all the histories showed that he hated Hitler, he hated us, but he was a German, and he fought for Germany. Just as if, let's say you don't like a particular president here, bad analogy, and you're in the military here, you're not going to simply go over to the other side. You're going to fight within the system. I think that's the best description of Skorzeny. I'm probably wrong. Some historian's going to call me and say you're an idiot, but that was, I've done a lot of reading about the guy since then, because I'm thinking about writing something that includes a bigger reference to Skorzeny. Skorzeny's throughout the novel, by the way. And much of it is ahistorical. He's supposedly in Tehran, and then he's taken out of Tehran and all of this. But I'm going on and on about it, but you guys probably don't care about Skorzeny, but please read about it.
So do you have a Mussolini book in the works?
No, Mussolini. Not a very interesting individual in my estimation. Does anybody disagree? Because I'm willing to be persuaded. Yeah, Mussolini, I thought was a little bit of a buffoon.
Mhm.
How can you say that about somebody who's leader of a country? Clearly he must have had some gifts, but all my reading on Mussolini was he was fortunate that he came into power or he acquired power at a particular period of time, because there were a lot of other things that should have worked against him coming to power, including his own limited intellect, in my estimation. And the fact that Hitler needed somebody like that. Okay, so I think he was propped up to a large extent. But Mussolini was the least fascinating character. But giants, clearly, FDR, Waldo Donovan, Churchill, Ian Fleming's in the book, by the way, because he was an actual historical character. Ian Fleming was not necessarily that interesting. Stalin is interesting, but kind of a cipher. And I think the guy, again, Lavrenti Beria was evil on steroids. So, read the book and you'll see why.
In the last few minutes, unless someone else has a question online or in person, I'd like to talk about all the espionage in the book and the illusion at the end that the German tech guy might be a spy.
Well, that's because you always want to have a cliffhanger for a sequel, right? Exactly right.
I'm giving you an opening.
Yeah, right. So there may be a sequel to that one, okay, using the same characters, and the sequel thus far is framed in this way. We all know about Normandy and the invasion of Normandy, and how they kept the invasion secret for such a long period of time. If you've ever seen the movie Patton, for example, where Patton is spirited off to England, and they have a whole scenario created around Patton because the Germans feared Patton more than any other general, and they believed Patton would be spearheading any invasion of Europe. Okay, so they created a number of divisions, fake divisions around Patton to throw the Germans off. Well, the premise of it is, it's a continuation of this book, is that Kennedy and Fulmer are to make sure the Germans don't find out that this is all some creation to divert attention from what was really going on. The Germans believed that the main invasion was going to come at the Pas de Calais, all right, because it was the shortest, frankly, distance between England and France, and they thought getting all those troops across the English Channel will be otherwise almost an impossibility. Nobody expected Normandy, okay, except for Hitler. Hitler thought it was going to be, and you may remember that there were a few generals who they thought Hitler was wrong about this, but nobody would say anything against Hitler. All right, they wouldn't say, no, you're wrong about this. It's actually going to be at Normandy, not the Pas de Calais. So, for example, let me think. I'm trying to think. Remember who the von Rundstedt believed it? Oh gosh,
Rommel?
Keitel, Rommel, definitely. Rommel's again hard to praise the enemy, but and this goes nothing beyond my research. I just has always been fascinated. I've read every Patton book. I was quoting a Patton book, which was like the highlight of my one Christmas when my brother-in-law gave me this book, and I'm quoted in it. My hero Patton, and I'm quoted in it. But virtually every major character, I think even MacArthur had an opinion on this. MacArthur had an opinion on everything, but everyone believed the invasion was going to be at Normandy. And
Calais.
the Germans, and so everybody believed it, and that was a great deception. So the book, the sequel to this one, the premise is going to be that Kennedy and Fulmer are charged with making sure the Germans don't find out where the real invasion is going to be, okay, and creating every kind of diversion imaginable. And Skorzeny shows up again, okay, and he comes to England and is about to discover that this is, and Skorzeny from the beginning doesn't believe, is not going along with Hitler on this. He doesn't believe for a moment that the invasion is going to be at Calais, but he needs hard proof of this. So Fulmer and Kennedy are playing cat and mouse with, I think, the greatest commando the Germans ever had, and that's Skorzeny. So it's a real titanic battle between these two guys. We'll see what happens at the end. I'm not finished with it, but it's going to be a lot of fun. A lot of people are going to get killed, a lot of blood, guts. It's going to be very, very much of a cliffhanger, even though we know how it all works out. But and also Fulmer he has to infiltrate the Abwehr, which is the German CIA, in order to perpetuate this fraud. And because Fulmer, and remember, well, don't want to give too much away.
No spoilers. So what's the next book coming out?
Don't know. I don't have a firm publication date, and if I did, my publisher would tell me to keep it quiet. But my next Black Russian is probably going to be the next book to come out, and I would expect it might be something that might be available this Christmas season, but I think we've missed it. Could be. We'll see. By the way, for all of you aspiring authors out there, what's interesting is, at least from my perspective, because I was never an author, I was always a lawyer, and then just decided to write, and I got very lucky. Publishing companies obviously are concerned about marketing things the right way, so they will hold on to a book for sometimes up to a year before they publish it, because they think the most propitious time in which the book to be published is whatever it is, because there's a confluence of different events, whatever it may be. So even though I may have a book done, they may hold it for a particular period of time. Also, they want to step on anything else that I may have done, because after a while you get sick of Kirsanow. Oh, it's another Kirsanow. But they do want to space it out a little bit. So I've got a few books in the works. I've got one that's completely done. They're holding on for a long time, and it may be out by Christmas time. And then I've got two other ones, one of which is almost completely done. I'm just doing the editing. And then the third one is the one I'm continuing to work on right now. So it's conceivable I could have 3 books come out in the next year. They'll probably want to space it out more than that, but about a year or so. Yeah.
My question has more to do with Devil's Weapon, because I'm still reading Zero Option, but there was a character, a young soldier, Emil, Emil.
Oh, the Polish?
Yes.
Yeah.
Will we ever hear back about him, or will we ever get
Likely
to
not.
see him again?
Unfortunately, when I wrote the character, I wanted him to have, he is in the next book, but just briefly.
Okay.
Okay, I wanted him to have a bigger role. He was a fascinating character to me, 15 years old, but these are the kind of people who fought World War II. You had these Polish partisans, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. And these were men, they didn't have any option but to be men. And, I have family members that fought in World War II, but in the United States of America, you had very few people under the age of 18 fighting. Okay, some people would lie about their age. Well, didn't Chesty Puller, the famous Marine, didn't he lie about his age? I can't remember. I mean, this guy was like the Marines Marine, but he was in the Pacific Theater. Some people would lie about their age, but in Poland, they didn't have any alternatives. They had 11, 12, 13-year-olds fighting because they needed every person to fight against the Wehrmacht. Again, it's another thing when you're doing this kind of writing. We all, we took history courses in high school and college, and I took a lot of history courses, by the way, and you know certain things, but when you have to write about it, you do the deep dive into it, but also it cogitate. You're constantly turning it over in your minds, and you get a greater appreciation, not just for the historical characters and what they had to go through, but for the average person, especially in a place like Poland. I write about the folks along the Baltic Sea and the Gdansk and places like that, and the fighting there. To me, I would not have been a hero. I probably would have curled up in a ball someplace. The kind of things that happen in every war. World War II, of course, was supposedly the war to end. World War I is going to end all wars, but then World War II is the biggest war in the history of the world. And the personal acts of heroism, cowardice, evil that occurred are something that really come home to you when you're writing about it in a way that if you're simply writing dry history, it's not the same, because you're actually writing about people and how they would react in certain circumstances, not just kind of like a sequential or chronological recitation of what transpired. And when characters are kind of dry and, you know who they are. These are people that are living your own mind. I tell people, and I may have even made allusion to this. Have you ever read, when you're writing, again, I never used to read the books about how to become an author. But then later I saw some of these books. But have you ever heard about authors who say that their characters talk to them?
Mm.
Okay, it's kind of a thing, I guess, that I've seen in videos of people who are talking about their books, prominent authors. And I said, oh, crap, these people are nuts. Well, unfortunately, one Saturday morning, I'm sitting there and I started writing dialogue for one of my characters, not the W.D. Griffin characters, but one of my fictional characters. And he's the protagonist in one of my novels. And I'm writing the dialogue and he said, I wouldn't have said that. It was a voice in my head. I actually heard it say, I would have said that. I'm like, holy crap, I'm getting nuts. So I decided to put my pen down for a minute and just kind of walk away. But I've heard a lot of people say the same things. Their characters almost come to life in their heads and they kind of talk to them. So talk about having screw loose.
Well, on that note, I think we need to conclude the program for today. We could probably stay here for hours, talking and asking questions, but thank you so much for joining us today,
A
Peter.
lot of fun. I love talking about this.